The morning of the wedding was supposed to be a celebration. The sun had risen gently over the red earth of the small Nigerian town of Okuta, casting a warm glow over the clay houses and the swaying palms. People were already gathered outside, the bride's family compound, singing, clapping, dancing. Everyone in town knew the name Chisholm, the girl with the softest smile, the one who helped elders with water, the one who sang in the church choir like her voice could call angels down. She was beautiful, tall, smooth-skinned, with curious eyes that held more silence than most ever noticed. She was only 21. A virgin, as proudly known by her family and praised by the elders. A good girl, they always said, nodding with approval, and today was supposed to be her reward. A wealthy businessman from Lagos, Chief Ekene, more than twice her age, had chosen her to be his bride. He built a new house for her parents, paid the dowry in full, even promised to send her 2 younger brothers to university. The town rejoiced. After all, this wasn't just Chisholm's wedding. It was a ladder out of struggle for the entire family. But Chisholm hadn't spoken a word in 3 days. That morning, she sat still while her aunties rubbed coconut oil on her skin, styled her, hair with cowries and gold beads, painted her lips with a soft red gloss. She looked like a queen, but she didn't smile, not once. People noticed but brushed it off. "She's just nervous," her mother said with a laugh, too forced to be honest. Her father didn't speak at all. He only paced around in his wrapper, avoiding her eyes. By 11 a.m., the compound was filled with guests. Laughter, drums, the smell of jollof rice and fried goat meat. Chief Ekene arrived in a black SUV, wearing a white agbada and sunglasses that never left his face. He looked proud. He carried himself like a man who had bought the moon. And then, just as the ceremony was about to begin, someone noticed Chisholm was gone. At first there was confusion. Maybe she went to freshen up. Maybe the pressure was too much and she needed a minute alone. But then a little girl came running, barefoot, crying, her voice high with panic. She ran toward the river bridge. What followed next was chaos. People shouted, some ran, others stood still in shock. Her mother dropped to the ground, screaming. Her brothers pushed through the crowd, chasing after the whispers and the direction the girl had pointed. But it was too late. By the time they reached the bridge, an old concrete arc that stretched over the Osun River, they saw her white wedding dress drifting slowly in the current. Just the dress, nothing else. She was gone. The town fell into silence. Chief Ekene stood at the edge of the bridge, red-faced and humiliated. "After everything I did for this girl?" he barked. "Ungrateful witch." But nobody responded. 3 hours later, the police pulled her body from the river. Her hands were still folded neatly, her eyes closed like she was sleeping, and in the small handbag tied to her waist, they found a single letter, folded 3 times and wrapped in plastic. It was addressed to everyone who loved me and everyone who pretended to. The moment the letter was read out loud, the entire town changed. The letter was opened by the town's priest, Father Kelechi. He held it with trembling hands right there on the banks of the river, surrounded by a circle of shocked faces, some crying, some speechless, others just waiting. No one knew what to expect, but no one expected what they heard. He cleared his throat, voice already thick with sorrow, and began reading. "To everyone who loved me, and everyone who pretended to, I didn't want to die. I wanted to live. But I couldn't breathe anymore. I couldn't keep smiling for you. I couldn't pretend that I wanted this life you forced on me. I said no so many times, and each time you all told me it was for my own good, that I would learn to love him, that this is what good girls do. But I was dying on the inside. Long before I climbed this bridge," silence dropped heavy after the first lines. A sob broke out behind the priest. Chisholm's mother clutched her wrapper like it would stop her heart from cracking. Her father dropped his head into his hands. Face buried in shame, Father Kelechi continued, "You called it a blessing, this man who came with money and promises. You said it was an honor. But no one asked me if I wanted to belong to a man older than my own father. No one cared that he touched me without asking, or that his eyes made my skin crawl. You all said I was lucky. Well, today I am free. Maybe. In death I can finally own my soul. People gasped. Women looked at each other, some mouths covered in shock, others shaking their heads in disbelief. But some weren't surprised. A few of Chisholm's friends in the choir exchanged knowing glances, as if they had heard parts of this story in whispers, hidden behind closed doors, tucked under pillows at night when no one was supposed to know. Father Kelechi paused, his voice breaking. But he finished the letter. To the girls who come after me, fight. Don't let them sell you, don't let them silence you, and if you can't fight, then run, because your body is yours, your soul is yours, and you are not here to decorate a man's life like furniture. I'm sorry I didn't run far enough, I'm sorry I had to leave this way, but I couldn't live a lie just to keep everyone else comfortable. I hope one day that will be enough. He folded the letter slowly and held it to his chest. No one said a word. The wind picked up a little, brushing gently against the mourners like Chisholm's spirit was passing by. Her body was still lying on the grass near the bridge, covered with a white cloth. Later that evening, the whispers began to spread through town. Some blamed her. She was weak. Some blamed Chief Akeen. That man was cursed. He always chased young girls. Some blamed her parents. They sold her for comfort, plain and simple. But some, the quiet ones, blamed themselves. A girl named Ada, who used to braid Chisholm's hair after school, sat at the edge of her bed that night and cried without making a sound. She remembered a night 2 weeks before the wedding when Chisholm had asked, almost in a whisper, "Do you ever feel like your life isn't yours?" And Ada had just laughed, thinking it was one of those philosophical moods Chisholm got into sometimes. She wished she had listened harder. In the following days, things changed in Okuta. People walked a little slower. The noise died down. Church. Services became more emotional. The bridge where Chisholm jumped was renamed silently in whispers, the Virgin's Edge. Nobody ever walked too close to it again, but what Chisholm left behind had just begun to bloom. A storm was coming to the town, and her death had been the lightning before the thunder. In the weeks that followed Chisholm's death, something shifted in Okuta. It wasn't loud or sudden. It was the kind of change that moved like smoke, slow, quiet, but it filled every space. Girls stopped laughing the same way. They looked at their mothers differently. Weddings didn't spark the same joy. And for the first time, people started whispering the truth about Chief Akeen. Stories began to surface. It started with a girl from a nearby village, Olamide, who came forward. She was only 19 and had been engaged to Akini before Chisholm. Her family had broken it off suddenly, saying it was because of tribal incompatibility. But now, under the weight of Chisholm's death, Olamide told the truth. "He forced himself on me," she said in a quiet voice at the town hall meeting. "He said if I ever told anyone, he'd make sure my father lost his job and we'd starve." Gasps filled the room. But no one stopped her. Not this time. Then came Ifeoma, a woman in her late 20s, now married with 2 kids. She stood up slowly, her hands shaking. "I worked as a receptionist in his office in Lagos when I was younger. He used to call me into his office and lock the door. When I cried, he said I was lucky he didn't record it. Each story was worse than the last. Each confession peeled back the shiny, polished skin of the man people once called a gift to this town. And just like that, Chief Akeen became a monster with a golden cane, wealthy, respected, untouchable, until now. By the end of the week, more than 7 women had come forward. The community was in shock. Some men tried to defend him. "Where's the proof?" they asked. "He built this town's hospital." But the mood had changed. Women stared them down, unflinching. Even the elders began to fall quiet, and all the while Chisholm's name was on every tongue. They buried her beside the old church, next to the only mango tree that still gave fruit in the dry season. Her grave was simple, no marble, no glamour, just a wooden cross and a ribbon with her name. But people came every day, young girls, widows, quiet wives, even a few boys who had once sat behind her in school. Some brought flowers, others just sat and said nothing. But all of them felt the same weight. Something sacred had been broken. Chisholm's parents hadn't been seen much since the funeral. Her mother had stopped eating, and her father sat outside their compound every evening, staring into nothing. Once he was heard whispering, "I didn't know, God forgive me, I didn't know," but the truth was he did. Maybe not the full horror, but enough to stop it, enough to ask questions, enough to fight. But money had blinded him. Comfort had hushed his doubts. And now all he had was a photograph of his daughter on her 18th birthday, wearing a red dress and smiling so wide the world could have melted. The priest, Father Kelechi, took it upon himself to do something. "Chisholm will not just be a name we whisper in guilt," he said during Sunday service. "She will be the reason things change." And he meant it. He started a small group for women to share their stories. At first, only a few came, then more, then even more. What began as a circle under the mango tree turned into a movement. People came from nearby villages. Journalists showed up. A lawyer from Abuja volunteered to represent the women against Chief Ikine. The walls were closing in on him. But powerful men don't go down without a fight, and Chief Ikine wasn't going to let the ghost of a girl ruin the empire he built, not without a war. The threat came silently at first. Father Kelechi found a note tucked under the church door one morning. No signature, just 6 words written in sharp, impatient handwriting: "Stop digging graves or get buried." He didn't flinch. He read it once, folded it carefully, and tucked it in the back of his Bible. He'd seen worse threats during the military regime, but it confirmed something he already knew. Chief Ikine was starting to feel cornered. That same week, one of the women who spoke out, Olamide, was followed home from the market. A group of boys with covered faces threw stones at her house, broke her windows, shouted filthy names into the dark night. "Ashawo, liar, destroyer of men." Her father wanted to send her away to her uncle's place in Ilorin, but she refused. "If I leave now, I'll never come back. They'll say I ran because I was lying. I'm not lying." And people believed her. For every whisper in the market that tried to shame her, there were louder voices rising up now. A few local women organized a small protest in front of the town hall, holding up signs that read, "Chisholm deserved better. My body is not for sale. Justice for our daughters." It was the first time in Okuta that women stood publicly like that, without asking their husbands first, without wrapping their pain in silence. The elders were shaken, some angry, some quietly agreeing. But the biggest shock came when Ifeoma's husband, a respected schoolteacher, stood with her at the protest, holding her hand. "I believe her," he said to the local reporter who came from Ibadan, "and I'd rather lose everything than let my daughter grow up thinking silence is the only way to survive." That quote made it into the papers. The story spread. Ikine, meanwhile, was scrambling behind the scenes. His lawyer was in constant contact with the police commissioner, trying to spin the narrative. He offered donations to officials, promised to sue for defamation, started telling people that this was all a political plot by his rivals. But it wasn't working. The tide had turned. He tried to visit Chisholm's parents, maybe to control the damage, but her father slammed the gate in his face. Her mother refused to speak, eyes sunken and hollow, like her soul had left with her daughter's last breath. By now the case was getting national attention. A human rights organization picked it up. A senator's wife tweeted about it. Donations began pouring into Father Kelechi's women's group. They started calling it Chisholm's Circle. Girls from nearby towns were joining. Some of them still carried fresh bruises. Some of them were only 13, already promised to men who smelled like old alcohol and power. And in all of this, Chisholm's letter became a symbol. It was printed, translated into Yoruba, Hausa, Igbo, even French, posted in schools, framed on church walls. It became something bigger than her pain. It became a weapon. But Ikine wasn't done yet. Late one night, a fire broke out behind the church building. It spread fast, but not fast enough. No one was hurt, just property. But it sent a message. Fear still lingered in the dark. Evil wasn't done fighting, and then came the real blow. Ikine announced he was leaving for London on business just days before his scheduled questioning by the police. His lawyer called it coincidence, but everyone knew it was escape. Only he didn't make it. As his SUV approached the airport expressway, a group of masked riders on bikes blocked the road. The driver panicked, tried to reverse, They shot the tires out, pulled Akeen from the back seat and beat him bloody. They didn't kill him, just enough damage to remind him. Power could slip through your fingers like dust. They left him on the side of the road, shirt torn, nose bleeding, wallet untouched. On his chest, they pinned a piece of paper. You broke her. We'll break your legacy. The town was stunned, some were horrified, others quietly satisfied, but no one cried for him. Justice had only begun. The image of Chief Akeen lying bloodied and bruised by the roadside went viral before sunrise. Someone had taken a photo. A blurry shot in the dark, headlights casting his twisted face in harsh white light, his agbada ripped open, gold chain, snapped and lying beside him like a snake with its head cut off. The note on his chest, "You broke her. We'll break your legacy," was clear as day. By noon it was all over Twitter. Justice for Chisholm was trending across Nigeria. At first he denied everything. He told reporters from his hospital bed that he was attacked by political enemies and that he was a victim of fake news and bitter women. But the public didn't buy it anymore. The women had voices now, real ones, loud ones. Backed by evidence, testimonies, and something Akeni could never understand, a community no longer willing to look away. Meanwhile in Okuta, Chisholm's circle was growing into something no one had seen before. They turned an abandoned warehouse near the market into a women's shelter. Volunteers came from other towns to help. A counselor arrived from Abuja. Even the headmistress of the local secondary school offered to host weekly workshops for teenage girls about consent, rights, and emotional abuse. And the girls, they showed up. They sat on old wooden benches and told their stories in cracked voices. Some sobbed, some clenched their jaws. Some couldn't even speak yet. They just listened, eyes wide, drinking courage like water. One girl, barely 15, whispered one afternoon, "My uncle said if I told anyone, no one would believe me." Another girl across the room, maybe 16, said firmly, "We believe you here." It was like healing in real time, but not everyone was ready to face it. Some men in the town were growing restless. They called it nonsense feminism, said it was destroying tradition, said women were now disrespecting culture. At one of the town council meetings, a well-known elder banged the table and shouted, "These girls are getting too bold. Next thing they'll be walking around naked and slapping their husbands." But the younger generation, especially the boys who had seen what happened to Chisholm, were no longer silent either. A 19-year-old boy named Kunle, who had grown up next to Chisholm's house, stood up during the same meeting and said quietly, "Maybe it's time culture changed, because if culture means she had to die, then culture is broken." You could have heard a pin drop. Father Kelechi watched all this unfold with tired but proud eyes. He had buried many people in his lifetime, but none like Chisholm. Her funeral hadn't just laid her to rest, it had resurrected something in the town, something raw, something brave. Even her mother had begun to emerge from the fog. She started, attending the women's meetings, often sitting in the back, silent. But one day she brought a photo of Chisholm as a baby, smiling in a yellow dress with ribbons in her hair. She passed it around the circle and said, she was laughing that day. She had just learned to clap her hands, that was all. But it was enough. Still, the storm wasn't over. Ikane, still healing from his roadside humiliation, was planning something. His ego was in pieces, but his connections were not. Word began to spread that he had filed a lawsuit for defamation, for damages, for emotional distress. He wanted to sue Chisholm's circle, the priest, even her father. He claimed she had mental problems, that her suicide was unrelated, that the women accusing him were fabricating stories for attention and revenge. And just like that, the fight became legal. Lawyers got involved. Court dates were announced. The nation watched. And Okuta, a small town once invisible on the map, had become the center of a battle that stretched far beyond one bridge, one girl, or one death. This was no longer just about Chisholm. It was about every girl who had ever been told her silence was her virtue. Courtroom number 3 at the High Court in Ilorin was packed beyond capacity the morning of the first hearing. The wooden benches groaned under the weight of journalists, human rights activists, villagers who had traveled all night by bus from Okuta, and curious onlookers who just wanted to see what would happen. Some had no idea who Chisholm was. They had only seen the photo of the white wedding dress floating on the river. But something about that image had stayed with people. It had burned itself into the collective conscience of a country long used to moving on too fast. The judge walked in, a serious-looking woman in her 50s whose sharp eyes scanned the room like a hawk. She sat quietly, adjusted her robe, and then nodded to the clerk. Call the case. Chief Ekene Olayemi vs. Chisholm's Circle, Father Kelechi, and 8 named defendants. The courtroom air changed. Chief Ekene entered, walking slowly, one hand still bandaged, the other gripping his cane like it owed him loyalty. He wore a navy blue suit that looked expensive, but couldn't hide the bruises still visible on his jaw. His lawyer, tall and clean-shaven with a Lagos accent, stood beside him like a polished dagger. On the other side of the room stood the defendants, ordinary people dressed simply. Father Kelechi wore his priest collar. Olamide wore no makeup. Ifeoma came with her husband. And in the front row, holding Chisholm's final letter printed on a laminated board, was her mother. The silence in the courtroom felt heavy enough to crush bone. Ekene's lawyer began with fire. He painted a picture of a powerful man brought down by village gossip. He used words like witch hunt, social media hysteria, and character assassination. He questioned the timing of the allegations. He suggested mental illness on Chisholm's part. He even pulled out fake psychiatric records, claiming she had hallucinations and anxiety disorders. Most of the courtroom frowned, but he spoke with the kind of confidence money can buy. Then it was the defense's turn. Their lawyer, a young woman named Barrister Ijeoma Okafor, stood calmly. She wasn't famous, she wasn't loud, but her voice cut through the room like lightning. She started by reading Chisholm's letter again. This time people cried openly. Then she called Olamide to the stand. Then Ifeoma. Then a girl named Halima, just 17, who had kept her abuse secret for years. Each story came like a wave, crashing into the lies Ekene had spent years building. They brought physical evidence too, texts, recordings, eyewitness accounts. One former driver of Ekene's testified that he was tired of cleaning up the man's mess. By the second day it was clear. This wasn't a defamation case. This was a reckoning. The judge listened, patient, precise, but her frown deepened. Each time Ekene's lawyer tried to twist the facts, then something happened that no one expected. A woman stood up in the courtroom, uninvited. She was old, maybe in her 70s, wrapped in faded Ankara cloth, her face full of years and silence. "I know this isn't the place," she said, trembling, "but I must speak." The judge paused, then gave a reluctant nod. "I was his nanny when he was a child," she said, pointing at Ekene. "I watched him grow, and I watched the darkness grow too. I said nothing then. I won't make that mistake again." Gasps filled the room. Ekene shifted in his seat, visibly disturbed. The judge ordered the court into recess, but the damage was done. The wall of lies was cracking. Outside the courtroom, the crowd erupted in support. Women cheered. Men nodded in quiet respect. Even the police officers on duty looked like they had changed sides. Back in Okuta, a group of young girls sat on the grass near Chisholm's grave, playing with beads and braiding each other's hair. They didn't understand court proceedings, but they understood what it meant when people started standing up for girls like them. Change wasn't just coming, it had arrived. But Ekene wasn't finished yet. A desperate man with money is still dangerous, and before justice could be delivered, one final twist would test everything the town had built. Just 3 days before the final court ruling, Okuta woke up to chaos. The town's only women's shelter, the heart of Chisholm's Circle, was set on fire in the dead of night. The flames licked the sky, red and wild, devouring the walls, the beds, the books, the artwork the girls had made. By the time neighbors noticed, it was too late. The place was gone, burnt to ashes. No one was hurt, thank God. A volunteer who had stayed behind late to clean had stepped out minutes before the explosion. She said she'd seen a black Jeep with tinted windows speeding away. No license plate, no noise, just fire. Everyone knew who was behind it. They didn't need proof. Chief Ekene had launched his final attack. It was a warning. But instead of fear, something else spread through Okuta that morning. Rage. People poured into the streets. Not just women, but men too. Boys from the secondary school carried hand-painted signs. Old market women screamed chants as they marched down the road barefoot. Even the imam from the local mosque joined the crowd in silent solidarity, and at the front of the protest, holding the same laminated copy of Chisholm's letter, now, smudged at the edges from too many tears, was her mother. This time she wasn't crying, she wasn't silent. She walked with her head high, eyes forward, like a mother who had given the world her child and would not let her memory be swallowed by flames. The news spread fast. Social media exploded. Chisholm's Circle on Fire started trending worldwide. Human rights lawyers from Abuja filed an emergency motion against Ekene, accusing him of witness intimidation, obstruction of justice, and attempted arson. The judge responded the same day. She froze all of Ekene's assets, declared him a flight risk, issued a warrant for his arrest if he even thought of leaving the state, and just like that, the mask was off. Ekene's power, his prestige, his connections, they all began to fall, away piece by piece, like rusted armor cracking open after decades of lies. He was no longer the man who built hospitals. He was now a man hiding behind a cane, afraid of a dead girl's voice, and that voice only grew louder. Father Kelechi, standing at the ruins of the shelter, gathered everyone together that evening. He didn't speak long. He just raised his hand and said, "Buildings can burn, but truth can't." Then slowly the people began to rebuild, right there on the ashes. They brought buckets, bricks, wood, nails. No waiting for donations, no long meetings, they just worked. The girls painted again, this time on broken cement walls. One girl wrote, "She jumped, but she didn't fall. We rose." Back at court, the judge summoned Ekene's lawyer and asked one question. "Do you still wish to continue this suit, or are we ready to speak the truth?" The lawyer, clearly under pressure, asked for time to consult, but it was clear. The case was crumbling. Witness after witness had testified. Evidence had been stacked higher than his excuses, and now even the court of public opinion had turned. But Ekene, he still didn't back down. He walked out of the courthouse that evening, lips curled into a crooked smile, flanked by 2 guards. When a journalist asked if he had anything to say to Chisholm's family, he turned, lowered his sunglasses, and said, "She was just a girl. Girls come and go." That was the final crack. It echoed like a bullet. Even people who had remained neutral now turned their backs. Even those who once praised him as a great man spat on his name. Even his guards later that night quietly resigned. By the time the final hearing arrived, Ekene was not a chief, not a businessman, not a savior. He was a broken man standing in the ruins of a broken lie, and he didn't even see the final blow coming. The final day of the trial felt like the whole of Nigeria was holding its breath. Courtroom 3 was packed again, but this time it wasn't tension that filled the air, it was expectation. A slow-burning fire of truth that had taken weeks, months, years to ignite, now roaring into something no one could stop. Chief Ekene sat with his head low. His face was drawn, thinner. The bruises had faded, but the weight of disgrace was now a permanent part of his posture. He no longer looked like a man in control. He looked like a man who finally understood that money couldn't buy silence forever. The judge read her ruling slowly, clearly, every word hammering into the silence, like a funeral bell. This court finds that the plaintiff, Chief Ekene Olayemi, knowingly misused his influence and status to silence, exploit, and intimidate women over a sustained period of years. We acknowledge that the alleged defamation was not fiction, but in fact grounded in overwhelming evidence, credible testimonies, and patterns of abuse. Accordingly, the case brought by the plaintiff is hereby dismissed, and counteraction is initiated for obstruction, sexual misconduct, and attempted destruction of evidence via arson. An immediate investigation into all claims made against the plaintiff is now formally ordered. A wave of gasps spread through the courtroom, followed by clapping, then cheering, and then, finally, tears. People wept openly, not just the survivors, but strangers, mothers, fathers, even police officers. It was more than a victory. It was a release. Akin was taken into custody immediately after the ruling. As the officers led him out, he tried to speak. "This is madness," he started. But no one listened. Not anymore. His voice was just noise now, like the buzzing of a dying fly. And as he passed by Chisholm's mother, seated on the first bench near the exit, he slowed, maybe expecting pity or guilt, or some last chance at dignity. But she didn't even look at him. She just reached into her bag, pulled out her daughter's letter again, and held it high in the air. The courtroom went quiet as she read aloud. "You are not here to decorate a man's life like furniture. You are not property, you are not silence." The silence held, then burst into applause like thunder. Later that week, back in Okuta, the women's shelter was rebuilt, stronger, brighter, and renamed Chisholm's House of Courage. Girls painted the walls with murals. One of a young woman standing on a bridge, not falling but flying. Wings made of letters stretched behind her. Her face was peaceful, bold, eternal. Schools in nearby towns began implementing programs on gender rights. Churches and mosques formed partnerships to protect and educate girls. Parents, realizing the pain of Chisholm's loss, began talking to their daughters, not just about obedience, but about choices. And Chisholm? She became legend. Not just the girl who jumped, but the girl who broke chains, who exposed the monster behind. The mask. Who wrote a letter that changed everything. Her grave became a place of pilgrimage. People came to lay flowers. Some came to whisper their own truths. Some brought their daughters to tell them her story, not as tragedy but as triumph. And while Chief Ikene faced trial after trial in prison, and the newspapers moved on to newer scandals, Okuta never forgot. The bridge where Chisholm took her final step was transformed. The townspeople built a railing of iron and inscribed one single sentence across its length. "She jumped, but we rose." And every year on the day she died, the town held a candlelight vigil. Girls wore white, boys read poems, mothers cried and hugged each other. Fathers stood quietly, hand in hand with their daughters. And as the candles flickered beneath the stars, a new silence filled the air. Not the silence of shame, but the silence of strength, of change, of a girl who, in leaving, taught a whole town how to finally live.